There's a special heartbreak when your own blood turns their back on you. For Caleb Vance, that pain cut deeper than any wound he'd ever known. After his cattle baron father died, Caleb's greedy brothers cast him out with nothing but a yellowed bank book showing a $20 deposit from 50 years ago. Desperate and starving, he rode to town just to withdraw enough for one meal and a bus ticket. But when he handed that book to the teller at Merchant's Bank, everything changed. What nobody knew, not his brothers, not even Caleb, was that those $20 held a secret. Could a 50-year-old bank book turn a broke cowboy into the most powerful man in the West? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The dust hung in the air of the Vance family study, like memories refusing to settle. Caleb stood near the window, his weathered hands clasped behind his back, watching the afternoon sun paint the ranch in shades of amber and gold. It was the same light that had greeted him every morning for 43 years, but today it felt different. Today it didn't belong to him anymore. His father, Thomas Vance, had been laid to rest 3 days ago on the hillside overlooking the valley. The old man had built an empire from nothing, starting with 100 acres and a dream back in 1923. By the time pneumonia took him at 87, the Vance Ranch sprawled across 12,000 acres of the finest grazing land in Wyoming, 3,000 head of Hereford cattle, water rights to the Sweetwater River, mineral rights that the oil companies had been sniffing around for a decade. All of it now belonged to Caleb's brothers. The lawyer, a thin man named Pemberton with spectacles that kept sliding down his nose, cleared his throat for the third time. He'd been reading from the will for 20 minutes, his voice a monotone drone that somehow made the dismantling of a lifetime feel bureaucratic and cold. To my eldest son, Marcus, Pemberton continued, I bequeath the northern section, comprising 4,000 acres, including the main house, barns, and all structures therein. Also, 1,000 head of cattle bearing the Vance brand. Marcus sat in the leather chair that had been their father's favorite, his thick frame filling it completely. He was 51 now, with a face that had grown hard over the years, like leather left too long in the sun. He didn't smile at the reading, but Caleb could see the satisfaction in his eyes. Marcus had always been certain this moment would come. To my second son, Raymond, the lawyer went on, I bequeath the southern section, comprising 4,000 acres, the foreman's house and equipment barn. Also, 1,000 head of cattle bearing the Vance brand. Raymond, 2 years younger than Marcus, nodded slowly. He'd been the smart one, the one who went to college in Denver and came back with ideas about modern ranching techniques. He'd also come back with an accountant's soul, seeing everything in terms of profit margins and tax advantages. He met Caleb's eyes for just a moment, then looked away. To my third son, William, Pemberton read, adjusting his spectacles. I bequeath the eastern section, comprising 3,000 acres, the equipment shed, and the water rights to the northern branch of Sweetwater River. Also, 1,000 head of cattle bearing the Vance brand. William was the youngest of the 3 older brothers, 45 and still unmarried. He'd always been the follower, content to let Marcus make the decisions and Raymond handle the numbers. He sat with his hands folded in his lap, staring at the floor. Caleb waited. He was the youngest at 43. The surprised child born when his mother was 42 and his father thought his family was complete. He'd grown up in the shadow of his brothers, always trying to prove himself worthy of the Vance name. And to my youngest son, Caleb, Pemberton paused, frowning at the document. He flipped to the next page and then back again. To Caleb, I bequeath a bank book, currently held in trust at Merchant's Bank of Casper, account number 147. The silence in the room was absolute. That's it, Marcus said finally, his voice carrying an edge of triumph. A bank book? Pemberton pulled a yellowed booklet from his case and placed it on the desk. It was small, no bigger than a man's palm, with a brown cover that had faded to tan in places. The pages were brittle, the ink faded to a pale blue that could barely be read. Caleb stepped forward and picked it up. His hands, calloused from a lifetime of ranch work, seemed too rough for something so delicate. He opened it carefully. On the first page, in his father's careful script from 50 years ago. Deposit, 20 Nasrs. Date, March 15th, 1925. Merchant's Bank. Nothing else. No other entries. No withdrawals. Just that single line. There must be some mistake, Caleb said quietly. His voice didn't shake. But something inside him did. Dad wouldn't— The will is quite clear. Pemberton interrupted, not unkindly. This is what Thomas specified for you. I can show you the language if you'd like. He was very particular about it. Marcus stood up, stretching like a man who'd just finished a good meal. Well, little brother, I guess that's that. $20 ought to buy you a bus ticket somewhere. Maybe you can start fresh in California or something. Marcus, Raymond said, but there was no real reproach in his tone. What? Marcus turned to face Caleb fully. We all know how this was going to go. Dad built this place for his sons, his real sons, the ones who were here from the beginning, who worked this land when it was nothing but rocks and sagebrush. I worked this land too, Caleb said. Every day since I was old enough to sit a horse. Sure you did, Marcus said. But you were never really part of it, were you? You were Mom's project, her little surprise baby. Dad just tolerated you because he loved her. The words hit like a fist to the stomach, not because they were said with anger, but because they were said with casual certainty. Marcus believed what he was saying. Maybe Raymond and William did too. Thomas loved all his sons, Pemberton said, but even he didn't sound convinced. Caleb looked at the bank book again. $20. In 1925, that might have bought a week's worth of groceries. Now it was barely enough for a tank of gas. He thought about all the times his father had pulled him aside over the years, talking about responsibility and legacy, about how a man builds something for those who come after, about how blood meant everything. Had it all been words? Had the old man been preparing him for this moment, softening the blow of being cut out? I want you off the property by tomorrow morning, Marcus said, settling back into the chair, his chair now. You can take your personal things, your saddle, that old gelding you're so fond of. But everything else stays. The truck stays. The tools stay. This is Vance property, and you're not a Vance anymore. Marcus, that's hardly necessary, Raymond began. It's exactly necessary. Marcus cut him off. We're running a business here, not a charity. He's got his inheritance. $20 is more than most men start with. Caleb closed the bank book carefully and slipped it into his shirt pocket. He looked at each of his brothers in turn, memorizing their faces, not with anger, but with a kind of sad curiosity. He'd grown up with these men, worked beside them, who eaten at the same table. And now he was looking at strangers. I'll be gone by sunrise, he said. He walked out of the study, through the house where he'd grown up, past photographs of Vance men going back 3 generations. His father stared out from a frame near the door, young and strong, holding the reins of a prize bull. Caleb paused there for a moment. What were you thinking, old man? He whispered to the photograph. What was this supposed to teach me? The photograph, of course, offered no answers. Outside, the ranch stretched in all directions, vast and beautiful in the fading light. The cattle were dark shapes against the grass, moving slowly toward the water. Smoke rose from the bunkhouse chimney where the hands were probably starting their evening meal. Everything was familiar. Everything was home. And none of it was his. Caleb walked to the small cabin near the eastern fence line where he'd lived for the past 10 years. It wasn't much. 2 rooms and a porch. But it had been his. He'd built the bookshelves himself, repaired the roof last spring, planted the cottonwood that was just now starting to provide shade. Inside, he sat at the small table and pulled out the bank book again. He studied it in the lamplight, turning it over in his hands. His father's handwriting was strong and clear on that single entry. March 15th, 1925. That was the year the old man had really started to build the ranch, the year he'd bought the first big herd. Why had he made this deposit? Why had he kept the book all these years? And why leave it to Caleb? There had to be more to it. His father hadn't been a cruel man. Stern, yes, distant at times, but not cruel. This had to mean something. Caleb spent the night packing his few possessions into a canvas duffel. His clothes, mostly work shirts and jeans worn soft with age. A few books, Zane Grey Westerns, a Bible his mother had given him, the photograph of her that sat on his nightstand, taken when she was young and smiling, before cancer had taken her 5 years ago. A pocket knife his father had given him on his 16th birthday, the handle worn smooth from use. That was it. 43 years of life fit into a single bag. He didn't sleep. Instead, He sat on the porch and watched the stars wheel overhead, the same stars that had watched over this valley for millennia. He thought about all the mornings he'd ridden out at dawn to check the fences, all the calves he'd helped birth, all the storms he'd weathered, all the simple, honest work that had made him feel like he was part of something larger than himself. By the time the sun rose, he'd made his peace with it. Not acceptance, exactly, but a kind of understanding. Life didn't always make sense. Sometimes you did everything right and still lost. Sometimes your own family looked at you and saw a stranger. He saddled Chester, his 15-year-old bay gelding, and tied his duffel behind the saddle. The horse sensed something was different, dancing nervously as Caleb mounted up. "I know, boy," Caleb said softly, patting the horse's neck. "I know." He rode past the main house without looking back. Marcus was probably already awake, drinking coffee in the study, planning how to manage his new empire. Raymond would be drawing up spreadsheets, calculating profit projections. William would be following along, agreeable as always. The gate at the property line seemed to take forever to reach. And then Caleb was through it, on the county road, no longer on Vance land. He stopped once, about a mile down the road, and turned in the saddle. The ranch spread out behind him, golden in the morning light, beautiful and prosperous and lost to him forever. "Goodbye, Dad," he said to the wind. "I hope you knew what you were doing." Then he turned Chester toward Casper and started riding. He had $20 coming to him, enough for a meal and a bus ticket, enough to start over somewhere else, somewhere nobody knew the Vance name or cared about cattle ranches or family legacies. It took him 2 days to reach Casper, sleeping rough along the road, rationing the last of his food. Chester needed rest, and so did Caleb. His body was tired, but his mind was tireder still, worn down by questions that had no answers. By the time he saw the buildings of Casper rising from the prairie, he'd made a decision. He'd cash in the $20, buy one good meal, and use whatever was left to get as far east as the money would take him. Maybe Denver, maybe further, somewhere he could find work that didn't remind him of everything he'd lost. The bank book rested in his pocket, light as air and heavy as his father's ghost. Merchants' Bank sat on the corner of Main and 2nd, a 3-story brick building that had watched Casper grow from a frontier town into a modern city. The limestone columns at the entrance were carved with the date 1923, 2 years before his father had made that mysterious deposit. Caleb tied Chester to a hitching post that was probably original to the building, one of the few left in town. Most places had parking meters now, spaces for automobiles instead of horses. He felt out of place standing there in his dusty work clothes, his duffel still strapped behind the saddle. Inside, the bank was all polished wood and brass fixtures. The ceiling was high, decorated with tin panels that caught the morning light. 3 teller windows lined the far wall, and a handful of customers waited in a roped queue. Everything smelled of paper and floor wax and money. Caleb joined the line, holding the bank book in both hands like it might evaporate if he wasn't careful. His stomach growled, reminding him he hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. $20. He'd get maybe 15 after any fees. Enough for a decent meal and a ticket to somewhere. The line moved slowly. An elderly woman ahead of him was disputing a charge, her voice rising with each explanation the teller offered. A businessman in a suit checked his watch repeatedly, sighing with impatience. Normal people doing normal business, while Caleb stood there with his whole life reduced to a yellowed booklet from half a century ago. Finally, he reached the window. The teller was a young woman, maybe 25, with neat brown hair and a professional smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "How can I help you today?" she asked. Caleb slid the bank book under the window. "I need to withdraw the balance on this account." She picked it up, and her smile faltered slightly. She turned it over, examining the worn cover, then opened it carefully. Her eyes scanned the single entry. "This is quite old," she said. "I'm not sure if— Let me get my supervisor." She disappeared through a door behind the teller stations. Caleb waited, aware of the businessman behind him shifting his weight with annoyance. Through the tall windows, he could see Chester standing patiently, flicking his tail at flies. The teller returned with an older man, late 50s, wearing a vest and tie. He had the bank book in his hand, and an expression Caleb couldn't quite read. "Concern, confusion, Mr. Vance," the man said. That's right. I'm Harold Mitchell, branch manager. Could you come with me, please? We need to discuss this in private. Something in the man's tone made Caleb's chest tighten. Is there a problem? No problem. Please just come with me. Mitchell led him past the teller stations, through a heavy wooden door, and into a hallway lined with offices. They entered a spacious room with a mahogany desk, leather chairs, and a wall of filing cabinets. Mitchell closed the door and gestured for Caleb to sit. Mr. Vance, how did you come by this bank book? Mitchell asked, settling behind his desk. It was my father's. Thomas Vance. He passed away last week. I see. My condolences. Mitchell opened the book again, studying it with an intensity that seemed excessive for a $20 account. And you're here to withdraw the funds? That's right. I know it's not much, but... Mr. Vance, do you know what this is? Mitchell interrupted, tapping the page. It's a bank book. $20 deposit from 1925. Mitchell leaned back in his chair, and for the first time, Caleb saw something like wonder in his face. No, sir, this isn't just a bank book. This is a founding share certificate. The words hung in the air between them. Caleb frowned. I don't understand. Mitchell stood and went to one of the filing cabinets. He pulled out a thick folder and returned to his desk, spreading several documents across the surface. In 1923, when this bank was founded, the owners needed capital to get started. They sold what they called founding shares, $20 each. It wasn't a standard deposit, Mr. Vance. It was an investment, a stake in the bank itself. Caleb's mouth had gone dry. What does that mean? It means, Mitchell said slowly, that your father didn't deposit $20. He bought a piece of this bank, and according to our charter, each founding share entitles the holder to a proportional ownership of the bank's assets and a percentage of all profits generated. But it's just $20. It was $20 in 1925. But Mr. Vance, this bank has been operating for 50 years. We've grown from a single room with 2 employees to 3 branches with 47 employees. We hold mortgages on half the ranches in this county. We finance business loans, home loans, agricultural loans. Every loan we've made, every dollar of interest collected, your father's share was accruing. Caleb felt like the floor had dropped out from under him. How much are we talking about? Mitchell pulled out a ledger and opened it to a marked page. His finger traced down a column of numbers. We've been maintaining this account as required by law, even though no one had accessed it in decades. The compound interest alone, he paused, doing mental calculations. Mr. Vance, I'll need to bring in our accountant to give you an exact figure, but based on these preliminary numbers, you're looking at somewhere in the vicinity of $400,000. The room spun. Caleb gripped the arms of his chair, certain he'd misheard. 400,000. Yes, sir, but that's just the accumulated dividends and interest. Your founding share also represents ownership in the bank itself. We'd need to have it properly valued, but Mitchell pulled out another document. According to our most recent audit, if the bank were liquidated today, it would be worth approximately $3.2 million. There were originally 50 founding shares sold. Most have been bought back by the bank over the years or transferred to the primary shareholders. Only 3 remain in outside hands, meaning you own 2% of this bank, Mr. Vance. But it's more complicated than that. The charter states that founding shares carry special voting rights. 1 founding share equals 10 common shares in voting power. The current board structure, he paused, spreading out an organizational chart. Let me put it simply. The bank is controlled by a board of 7 directors. The majority shareholder, Wendell Hartley, holds 48% of common shares. His son holds another 15%. With your founding share and its voting multiplier, you effectively hold 20% voting power. That makes you the second largest shareholder. Caleb couldn't speak. His mind kept trying to process the numbers and failing. There's more. Mitchell continued. 3 years ago, the bank made a significant expansion. We acquired the mineral rights to several properties in the northern part of the county, not to drill ourselves, but to hold as collateral for agricultural loans. One of those properties was the Vance Ranch. The name hit Caleb like cold water. What? Your brothers took out a substantial loan 18 months ago. $200,000 to expand operations, purchase new equipment, acquire additional grazing land. They used the ranch as collateral. The full ranch, all 12,000 acres, the cattle, the water rights, everything. I didn't know about any loan. You wouldn't have. You weren't listed as an owner. But Mr. Vance, the bank holds the mortgage. And you, as a 20% voting shareholder, have significant influence over the bank's lending policies and debt collection procedures. The implications crashed over Caleb in waves. His brothers had cut him out, given him what they thought was worthless, tossed him away like trash, and in doing so, they'd handed him the power to destroy them. My father knew, Caleb said quietly. He knew what this was. I imagine he did. Thomas Vance was one of the smartest men I ever met. I'd wager he knew exactly what he was doing when he wrote that will. Caleb stood up, his legs unsteady. He walked to the window and looked out at the street. Chester was still there, patient and loyal. Beyond him, the town stretched away toward the prairie, and beyond that, toward the ranch that had been stolen from him. No, not stolen, given away. His brothers had simply taken what they thought was theirs, what they'd believed they'd earned. What happens now? Caleb asked, not turning around. That's up to you, Mr. Vance. The board meets next week. As a major shareholder, you have every right to attend. You can demand a full accounting of your shares' value. You can vote on bank policies. You can... Mitchell paused. You can do quite a lot, actually. Caleb turned back to face the banker. And the loan? My brother's loan. The terms are standard. Payments due quarterly. They're current right now, but ranching is unpredictable. If they were to default... Mitchell spread his hands. The bank would foreclose. Standard procedure, and as a major shareholder, you'd have a significant voice in that decision. How long do I have to think about this? As long as you need. Though I'd suggest you consult with an attorney. This is complicated territory, Mr. Vance. You're going to need advice. Caleb picked up the bank book from the desk. It felt different now, not light anymore. It felt like what it was, power, wealth, and a kind of justice he'd never imagined possible. I'll be in touch, he said. He walked out of the office, through the bank lobby, and into the sunlight. Chester nickered softly as Caleb untied the reins. He stood there for a long moment, one hand on the saddle, looking at nothing and everything. His father's voice came back to him, something the old man had said years ago. A man who builds something always leaves a door open for those who understand. I understand now, Dad, Caleb whispered. God help me, I understand. Caleb found a lawyer 3 blocks from the bank. The sign outside read, Eleanor Garrett, attorney at law, in gold letters on black. The building was old but well maintained, sandstone with high windows that let in the morning light. The receptionist, a woman with gray hair pulled back in a neat bun, looked up from her typewriter as Caleb entered. Her eyes took in his dusty clothes and worn boots, but her smile didn't waver. Can I help you? I need to speak with Miss Garrett. It's about a legal matter. Do you have an appointment? No, ma'am, but it's important. She studied him for a moment, then stood. Let me see if she's available. She disappeared through a door, and Caleb heard low voices. A moment later, she returned. Miss Garrett can give you 15 minutes. Please, come with me. Eleanor Garrett was perhaps 50, with sharp eyes and silver hair, cut shorter than most women wore it. Her office was lined with law books, and her desk was covered with organized stacks of papers. She stood as Caleb entered, extending her hand. Miss Garrett, I'm Caleb Vance. Her handshake was firm. Please sit. What brings you to my office, Mr. Vance? Caleb sat in the chair across from her desk and pulled out the bank book. I need advice about this. He told her everything. The will. The $20. What Mitchell had revealed at the bank. She listened without interrupting, making occasional notes on a legal pad. When he finished, she sat back in her chair. May I see the bank book? He handed it across the desk. She examined it carefully, then set it down and tapped her pen against her notepad. Mr. Vance, you understand what you're sitting on here. Mitchell tried to explain it, but you're holding leverage over one of the most powerful families in this county. The Hartleys have run that bank for 30 years. They're not going to be pleased when they discover they have a major shareholder they didn't know about. Mitchell seemed worried about that. Mitchell is smart to be worried, but that's his problem, not yours. She leaned forward. Your problem is deciding what you want to do with this. You have 3 basic options. First, you can sell the share back to the bank. They'll pay you fair market value, probably negotiate it down as much as they can, but you'd walk away with substantial money. Second, you can hold the share as an investment. Attend board meetings, collect your dividends, Stay involved, but not confrontational. Third, she paused, you can use it. Use it how? Your brothers took out a $200,000 loan. You now have influence over the institution that holds that debt. If they default, if they miss payments, if the bank decides to review their terms, you have a voice in those decisions. That sounds like revenge. That's one word for it. Another word is justice. She set down her pen. Mr. Vance, I've been practicing law for 28 years. I've seen a lot of estate disputes, a lot of families torn apart by money and property. What your brothers did to you, casting you out with what they thought was nothing. That tells me everything I need to know about their character. They're still my brothers, are they? She said it gently, but the question hung heavy in the air. When you needed them most, they turned their backs. When your father died, they saw an opportunity to cut you out completely. Now you have the power to make them understand what that feels like. Caleb stared at the bank book on her desk. His father's handwriting stared back at him. What would you do? That's not my decision to make. But I can tell you this. Your father was a deliberate man. He didn't leave you that bank book by accident. He knew exactly what it represented. He knew your brothers would take everything else, and he left you the one thing that could level the playing field, or destroy them. That too. She picked up the bank book and handed it back to him. You don't have to decide today, but you should know your rights. As a major shareholder, you're entitled to attend board meetings, review financial records, vote on major decisions. The bank is required to notify you of all meetings and provide you with quarterly reports. That should have been happening for 50 years, but obviously it wasn't, because nobody knew the share existed. Exactly, which means the bank has been in violation of its own charter. That gives you additional leverage if you need it. She pulled out a business card and wrote something on the back. This is my retainer information. If you decide you want representation, I'd be happy to take your case. If not, I'd still advise you to find a lawyer before you make any major decisions. Caleb took the card, turning it over in his fingers. What's your rate for something like this? 20% of whatever settlement or value we secure, but we can discuss that if you decide to move forward. He stood, tucking the card into his shirt pocket next to the bank book. Thank you for your time. Mr. Vance, she said as he reached the door. One more thing. Your brothers are going to find out about this eventually. Mitchell will have to inform the board, and word will spread. You should be prepared for that conversation. What should I say? The truth. You inherited this from your father. You're exercising your legal rights. And what happens next depends entirely on how they choose to respond. She smiled, and there was something sharp in it. But between you and me, I suspect they're going to wish they'd been kinder to you. Outside, the sun was higher now, the day warming. Caleb stood on the sidewalk, watching people go about their business. A mother with 2 children. An old man walking a dog. A truck rattling past with a load of lumber. Normal life continuing while his world had been turned completely upside down. He found a diner 2 blocks away and ordered the lunch special. Meatloaf, mashed potatoes, green beans, coffee. The food was good, simple and honest. He ate slowly, thinking about everything Eleanor Garrett had said. His brothers had cast him out without a second thought. They'd taken everything their father had built and left Caleb with what they believed was nothing. No mercy, no compassion, not even basic decency. And yet, the thought of destroying them made his stomach turn. They were still his blood. They'd grown up in the same house, eaten at the same table, learned to ride from the same father. Somewhere under all the greed and arrogance, they had to still be the brothers he'd known as a boy. But maybe that was the problem. Maybe they'd never really been his brothers at all. Maybe he'd just been fooling himself all these years, seeing connection where there was only tolerance, seeing family where there was only proximity. The waitress refilled his coffee, and Caleb thanked her. She smiled, a kind smile that expected nothing in return, a stranger showing him more courtesy than his own brothers had. He finished his meal and paid, leaving a generous tip. Outside, Chester was waiting where he'd tied him. The horse had attracted a small crowd of children who were petting his nose and feeding him grass. Caleb watched them for a moment. Their simple joy, their innocence. "All right, boy," he said, taking the reins. "Let's find us a place to stay while we figure this out." He led Chester down the street, past storefronts and offices, until he found a stable that would board the horse. The owner, a barrel-chested man with a thick mustache, quoted him $2 a day. "I'll take a week," Caleb said. counting out $14 from the small amount of cash he still had. With Chester settled, Caleb found a modest hotel 3 blocks away. The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the street. He set his duffel on the bed and sat down, pulling out the bankbook one more time. His father stared up at him from the page. That careful signature from half a century ago. Thomas Vance, a man who'd built an empire and then divided it among his sons, but not equally, not fairly, deliberately. "What did you want me to do, Dad?" Caleb asked the empty room. What was the lesson here? The bank book offered no answers, but somewhere in his chest, Caleb felt something shifting. Not anger exactly, not revenge. Something colder and more purposeful. His brothers had made a choice. They'd decided who deserved the Vance legacy and who didn't. They'd drawn their lines. Now it was Caleb's turn to draw his. The next morning, Caleb returned to Merchant's Bank with Eleanor Garrett at his side. Mitchell had agreed to meet them before normal business hours, and the bank felt different in the early light. Quieter, more serious, like a church before services. Mitchell led them to a conference room on the second floor. A long table dominated the space, surrounded by leather chairs. On the wall hung photographs of the bank's founding directors, stern men in high collars staring down at posterity. "I've prepared the documents you requested," Mitchell said, spreading folders across the table. "These are copies of the founding share charter, the bank's articles of incorporation, and the current board structure. I've also included the loan agreement with Vance Ranch, as you're entitled to review any lending decisions that might affect your investment." Eleanor picked up the loan agreement first, her eyes scanning the pages. Caleb watched her face, trying to read what she was finding. "This is aggressive," she said finally. "The terms are harsh. High interest rate, short repayment period, and the collateral clause." She looked at Mitchell. "This puts them in a very precarious position." Mitchell shifted in his seat. "The board approved the loan based on projected revenue. The ranch had been profitable for years. It seemed like a sound investment. Who pushed for these specific terms?" "Wendell Hartley. He and the Vance brothers have had business dealings before. I believe there was some personal history there." Caleb leaned forward. "What kind of history?" "I'm not privy to the details, but I know there was a land dispute 15 years ago. Your father won. Hartley didn't take it well." Mitchell paused. "These terms, if I'm being honest, they feel punitive." Eleanor set down the loan agreement and picked up the charter documents. She read in. Silence for several minutes, her finger tracing lines of text. Finally, she looked up. "Mr. Vance, this charter is remarkable. The founding directors gave founding shares extraordinary protections. You can't be diluted. Your voting rights can't be reduced, and there's a provision here." She pointed to a paragraph. "Any decision to foreclose on agricultural property requires unanimous board approval, not majority. Unanimous. Meaning if your brothers default on their loan, the bank can't foreclose unless all 7 board members vote yes. As a major shareholder with multiplied voting power, you effectively have veto authority." Mitchell's face had gone pale. "I wasn't aware of that provision. Most people wouldn't be. This charter is 50 years old, and I'd wager nobody's read it cover to cover in decades." Eleanor smiled. "But it's still legally binding. Every word of it." Caleb sat back in his chair, processing the information. His brothers had taken out a loan with brutal terms, probably because Hartley wanted revenge for some old grudge against their father. And now Caleb held the power to save them or destroy them. "What's their payment schedule?" he asked. Mitchell pulled out another document. "Quarterly payments of $12,000. Next payment is due in 6 weeks. Have they been making the payments?" "So far, yes. They're current, but ranching is unpredictable. As you know, a bad winter, disease in the herd, drop in beef prices. Any of those could put them in jeopardy." Eleanor gathered the documents into a neat stack. "Mr. Vance, you need to make a decision. Do you want to exercise your shareholder rights actively or passively? Explain the difference. Passively means you sit on your shares, collect dividends, and don't make waves. You'd be wealthy, but uninvolved. Actively means you attend board meetings, vote on decisions, and use your influence to shape bank policy, including decisions about your brother's loan." Caleb stood and walked to the window. Below, the town was coming to life. Shop owners opening their doors, people walking to work, the everyday rhythm of a place that had no idea what was being decided in this quiet room. So, if I attend board meetings, Hartley will know who I am. He'll know regardless, Eleanor said. Mitchell has to inform the board of your share. That's required by law. The only question is whether you show up to claim your seat or let them continue running things without you. When's the next meeting? Next Thursday, Mitchell said. 7 days from now. Caleb turned back to face them. I'll be there. Mitchell nodded slowly. I'll send you the formal notification. The meeting is at 2 o'clock in this building. You'll need to bring proof of ownership. The bank book will suffice, and identification. One more thing, Caleb said. I want copies of all financial records related to Vance Ranch. Every document, every note, everything. That's your right, as a shareholder. I'll have them prepared. Eleanor stood, extending her hand to Mitchell. Thank you for your cooperation. We'll see you next week. Outside, the morning sun was warm on Caleb's face. Eleanor walked beside him toward her office, her heels clicking on the sidewalk. You did the right thing, she said. Did I? I don't even know what the right thing is anymore. The right thing is standing up for yourself, not letting them steamroll you just because they're family. She paused at the corner. I've seen too many people like you, Mr. Vance. Good people who get taken advantage of because they're too kind, too forgiving. Your brothers counted on that. They counted on you just disappearing quietly. Maybe I should have. And maybe they should have treated you better. Her voice was gentle but firm. This isn't revenge, Caleb. This is justice. There's a difference. After she left, Caleb spent the day walking through Casper. He'd been here before, but always as a ranch hand coming to town for supplies. Now he was seeing it differently, through the eyes of someone who belonged, someone with means and purpose. He passed storefronts and offices, restaurants and theaters. He watched people go about their lives. Families, workers, children playing in parks, normal people living normal lives, unburdened by questions of loyalty and betrayal. In the late afternoon, he found himself standing outside a Western Union office. He stood there for a long time, hand on the door handle, debating. Finally, he went inside and sent a telegram to the ranch. Need to speak with you. Important family matter. Caleb, he addressed it to Marcus. Let his oldest brother be the first to know something was coming. Let him wonder what it meant. That evening, in his hotel room, Caleb spread out the copies of the loan documents Eleanor had given him. He read them carefully, multiple times, until he understood every clause and condition. The terms really were harsh. His brothers were paying nearly twice the normal interest rate, and the repayment schedule was aggressive. Why had they agreed to it? Desperation, ambition, or had Hartley simply outmaneuvered them, using their greed against them? Caleb found himself thinking about his father again. The old man had always been careful with money, conservative with debt. He'd built the ranch slowly, never overextending, never risking more than he could afford to lose. It was one of the lessons he'd tried to teach all his sons. Apparently, Marcus, Raymond, and William hadn't been listening. Or maybe they had been listening, but only to the parts about building empires, not the parts about caution and sustainability. They'd wanted to expand fast, to prove themselves, to show they could grow the ranch beyond what their father had achieved, and in their rush, they'd put everything at risk. Caleb looked at the bank book sitting on the nightstand. His father's gift, his father's lesson. Thomas Vance had known. His sons, all of them. He'd known Marcus's pride, Raymond's ambition, William's weakness, and he'd known Caleb's kindness. But maybe the old man had also known that kindness wasn't the same as weakness, that there was strength in integrity, that sometimes the youngest son, the overlooked one, might be the one who truly understood what it meant to build something that lasted. I hope I'm right about this, Dad, Caleb said to the empty room. I hope you knew what you were doing. Outside his window, the sun set over Casper, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Tomorrow would bring new questions, new decisions, but tonight, Caleb felt something he hadn't felt since before his father's death. He felt ready. The response came 2 days later. Caleb was having breakfast at the diner when a messenger boy found him, a telegram folded in his hand. Mr. Vance, got a wire for you. Caleb tipped the boy a quarter and opened the telegram. Marcus's reply was brief and cold. Whatever you want can wait. Ranch business more important. Caleb folded it carefully and tucked it into his pocket. The dismissal was so casual, so absolute it was almost impressive. Even now, even after being cast out, Marcus couldn't imagine that Caleb might have something worth saying. That afternoon, Mitchell sent word that the financial records were ready for review. Caleb spent 3 hours in a small office at the bank, poring over documents. Eleanor had offered to help, but he wanted to see them himself first, to understand his brother's situation without a lawyer's interpretation. The numbers told a story. The loan had been taken out 18 months ago, in January of last year, $200,000, with the first payment due 3 months later. Since then, his brothers had made 6 payments, each one exactly on time. But the ranch's quarterly revenue reports showed a troubling pattern. Income had been declining, not dramatically, but steadily. Feed costs were up, beef prices were down, medical expenses for the herd had spiked twice, once for pneumonia, once for a parasite outbreak. His brothers were making the payments, but barely. The margins were getting tighter. Caleb found a ledger showing the loan's intended purpose: expansion to the west, acquiring an adjacent 3,000-acre property, new equipment, tractors, trucks, fencing materials, improvements to the breeding program. All reasonable investments, the kind that could pay off over time. But they required time, and Hartley's loan terms didn't give them much of that. There were also correspondence files, letters between Marcus and the bank, between Hartley and the ranch's accountant. Caleb read them carefully, watching the tone shift over the months, confident at first, then cautious, then worried. The most recent letter, dated 3 weeks ago, showed Marcus requesting an extension on the next payment, just 30 days. Hartley had denied it. Caleb sat back, rubbing his eyes. His brothers were in trouble. Not immediately, but the trajectory was clear. One bad quarter, one unexpected expense, and they'd miss a payment. And if they missed one, with these terms, they'd miss more. The ranch would be lost. Find what you needed. Caleb looked up. Mitchell stood in the doorway, jacket off, sleeves rolled up. It was late, past 6 o'clock. Most of the staff had gone home. My brothers are drowning, Caleb said. Mitchell entered the office and sat down across from him. They're managing for now, barely, and winter's coming. That's always the hardest time. I know. Mitchell was quiet for a moment. For what it's worth, I argued against those terms. I thought they were too aggressive, but Hartley controls the board, and what Hartley wants, Hartley gets. Tell me about him. Mitchell leaned back, choosing his words carefully. Wendell Hartley is 63 years old. Built his fortune in timber and mineral rights. Bought his way onto the bank's board 15 years ago and has been expanding his influence ever since. He's not a stupid man, but he's vindictive. He carries grudges, like the one against my father. That's right. 20 years ago, there was a water rights dispute. Prime grazing land in the Northern Valley. Both families claimed historical access. It went to court. Your father won. Hartley not only lost the water rights, he lost face. In front of the whole county, and he's been waiting for payback ever since. I think so. When your brothers came asking for a loan, Hartley saw his chance. He gave them the money, but on terms that would eventually break them. It's patient revenge. Caleb looked at the files spread across the desk. If they default, what happens? Standard foreclosure procedure. The bank gives 90 days' notice. If payments aren't brought current, the property is seized and auctioned. Given the size of the ranch, it would probably be broken up and sold in pieces. How much would the bank recover? On a forced sale, maybe 60–70% of the loan value. The bank would take a loss, but Hartley doesn't care about the money. He wants to see the Vance name humiliated. And you're going along with this? Mitchell met his eyes steadily. I'm an employee, Mr. Vance. I don't have the power to stop it, but you do. That's why I wanted you to see these files. That's why I've been more helpful than I probably should be. Why? Because I knew your father. He was an honorable man. What's happening here isn't about business. It's about old grudges and petty vengeance. That's not what banking should be. Caleb gathered the files into a stack. Can I take copies of these? I'll have them sent to your hotel tomorrow. Walking back through the empty bank, Caleb thought about power and how it worked. A year ago, he'd been nobody, a youngest son working his father's ranch, earning his keep but owning nothing. Now he held enough influence to save or destroy his brothers with a single vote. It should have felt good. It should have felt like justice. Instead, it just felt heavy. That night he wrote letters, 3 of them, 1 to each brother. He didn't send them, just wrote them, trying to find the right words to explain what had happened, what he'd discovered, what they now faced together. Every draft sounded wrong, too angry or too meek, too forgiving or too vengeful. He finally gave up and tore them all into pieces. The truth was simpler than anything he could write. His brothers had cast him out. His father had given him the means to survive that casting out, and now, through a twist nobody could have predicted, their fates were tangled together again. He could let them fall, watch them lose everything the way they'd taken everything from him. That would be justice of a sort. Or he could help them, save them from Hartley's trap, prove he was the bigger man. But there was a third option, one that kept circling in his mind. He could do nothing. Just attend the board meeting, make himself known, and then watch events unfold without interference. Let his brothers' own decisions, their own mistakes, determine their fate. Caleb lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the town outside his window. Somewhere out there, his brothers were going about their lives, unaware that their youngest sibling, the one they'd dismissed, now held their future in his hands. "What would you do, Mom?" he whispered into the darkness. His mother had been the gentle one, the peacemaker. She'd always found ways to smooth over conflicts, to help her sons see each other's perspectives. She'd loved all of them equally, without the favoritism that sometimes crept into their father's treatment. If she were here now, what would she say? Forgive them, make them earn forgiveness? Or would she say that some betrayals couldn't be undone, that family was more than blood, it was loyalty and trust? He didn't know, but in 7 days, he'd have to walk into that board meeting with an answer. He'd have to decide what kind of man he was, what kind of brother he wanted to be. The bank book sat on the nightstand, a silent witness to everything. Caleb picked it up, holding it in the darkness. "You gave me a choice, didn't you, Dad?" he said softly. "You knew I'd have to choose." That's what this was really about. The bank book, as always, gave no answers. But somewhere in his chest, Caleb felt the weight of the decision settling in. Not lighter, not clearer, just inevitable. 3 days before the board meeting, Caleb found himself in the county records office, a musty building that smelled of old paper and floor polish. He wasn't sure what he was looking for exactly. Just answers, context, some way to understand the choices that had led to this moment. The clerk, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, helped him locate the property records for the Vance Ranch. The files went back 80 years, showing the gradual accumulation of land. His grandfather had started with 100 acres in 1903. His father had expanded it piece by piece, transaction by transaction, building the empire his brothers now controlled. But there was another name that kept appearing in the records: Hartley. For every piece of land Thomas Vance had acquired, there was often a competing claim from Wendell Hartley. And in nearly every case, Thomas had won. The water rights dispute Mitchell had mentioned was there in detail. Court documents, depositions, surveys. Hartley had claimed historical access based on maps from the 1880s. Thomas had produced better maps, clearer documentation, and testimony from older ranchers who remembered how the land had actually been used. The judge's ruling had been decisive. The evidence overwhelmingly favors Vance. Hartley's claim is dismissed with prejudice. Legal language that meant Hartley couldn't bring the case again. A permanent defeat. There were other disputes too. Mineral rights, grazing permits, even a fence line that both families claimed. In every single case, Thomas Vance had won. Caleb could imagine how that must have eaten at Hartley. Not just losing, but losing repeatedly, publicly, to the same man. Finding what you need, Caleb looked up. An old man stood nearby, watching him with curious eyes. He wore a suit that had been expensive once, but was worn now at the cuffs and collar. His face was weathered, his hands spotted with age. "Just doing some research," Caleb said. "On the Vance Ranch?" The old man smiled. "I figured as much when I saw which files you were reading. I'm James Whitmore. I was the county clerk for 32 years. Retired now, but I still come in sometimes." Old habits. Caleb Vance. Whitmore's eyebrows rose. "Thomas's youngest boy. I heard about the will reading. Heard you got cut out. Small towns. Everybody knew everything." "That's right. Shame. Thomas was a good man. Tough but fair. He and I had dealings over the years. Whitmore pulled out a chair and sat down uninvited. You know, I always wondered about that bank book. Caleb felt his chest tighten. You knew about it. I was there when he bought it. Spring of 1925. The bank was just getting started. Needed capital, and Thomas had just sold his first big herd. He had cash to spare. Most folks thought he was crazy, putting money into a bank that might not last a year. But Thomas said something I never forgot. What was that? He said, "A man plants seeds he might never see grow. That's what building a future means." Whitmore leaned back in his chair. I think he knew even then that he was making an investment for somebody down the line. He just didn't know who yet. He had 4 sons at the time. 3. You weren't born until 10 years later. But yes, he had Marcus, Raymond, and William, and from what I saw, he was already starting to measure them. Whitmore paused, choosing his words carefully. Thomas loved all his boys, but love doesn't mean blindness. He knew their strengths and their weaknesses, and he thought they were weak. I think he thought they were ambitious without wisdom. That's a dangerous combination in a rancher. You need patience to work the land. You need to understand that nature moves on its own schedule, not yours. Whitmore gestured at the files on the table. Look at how Thomas built his holdings. Slow, steady, never overextending. Every piece of land he bought he could afford to lose if things went wrong. That's wisdom, and my brothers don't have that. Did they ask for that loan just to expand? Or did they ask for it to prove something? The question hung in the air. Caleb thought about Marcus's pride, Raymond's need to modernize, William's desire to be seen as an equal. The loan hadn't been about need, it had been about ego. You knew Hartley too? Caleb asked. Oh yes, Wendell and I go way back. He's a bitter man, always has been. He came west thinking he could take what he wanted, the way men used to in the old days. But by the time he arrived, the law had caught up with the frontier. You had to buy land fair and square, follow the rules, respect other men's claims. That didn't sit well with Wendell. He wanted to be a cattle baron. He wanted to be a king. Whitmore corrected. And your father kept beating him at every turn. Not through force or intimidation, but through preparation and patience. That's what really galled Hartley. Losing to someone who played by the rules and still came out ahead. So now he's getting his revenge through my brothers. Seems that way. Though I wonder if Thomas knew this might happen. He was a sharp man, your father. Saw things coming before others did. Caleb looked at the old man. Do you think he planned all this? Left me the bank book knowing what it would mean? Whitmore was quiet for a long moment. I think he gave you a choice. He could have divided the ranch equally. Could have protected you in the will. Instead, he gave your brothers what they wanted and used something they couldn't understand. That tells me he was testing everybody. Testing them how? Your brothers, could they handle power and wealth without destroying themselves? And you, could you handle being cast out and still do the right thing when the chance came? Whitmore stood slowly, his knees creaking. That's the thing about wisdom, son. It's not just knowing what to do. It's knowing when to do it and having the strength to follow through. After Whitmore left, Caleb sat alone with the files. He thought about his father's patient accumulation of land, his careful building of the ranch. Every decision measured, every risk calculated. Thomas Vance had been playing a long game. And somehow, impossibly, that game was still being played now, 3 weeks after his death. Caleb returned to his hotel as evening fell. He found a package waiting at the front desk. The copies of the financial records Mitchell had promised. He carried them upstairs and spread them across the small desk in his room. One document caught his eye. A personal note, handwritten, clipped to the loan agreement. It was from Hartley to Marcus, dated the day the loan was finalized. Pleased to continue your father's legacy. I'm sure Thomas would be proud of your ambition. The words were courteous on the surface, but Caleb could read the poison underneath. Would be proud, past tense, as if Thomas were already dead, even though he'd lived another year after the loan was signed. And that word, ambition, not wisdom, not stewardship, ambition. Hartley had known exactly what he was doing. He'd given Marcus rope and watched him start tying the noose. Caleb picked up the bank book and turned it over in his hands. Such a small thing, such enormous power. His father had built a trap, he realized. Not for Caleb, for everyone, for the brothers, to see if they could handle wealth without wisdom. For Hartley, to see if his patience matched his vindictiveness, and for Caleb to see if being cast out would make him cruel or keep him good. 3 days. In 3 days, he'd walk into that board meeting and they'd all see which version of himself he'd chosen to be. He went to the window and looked out at the darkening town. Somewhere beyond those buildings, beyond the prairie, his brothers were on the ranch, working the land, making decisions, unaware that their world was about to shift again. Caleb pressed his hand against the glass, feeling the cool of the evening through it. He thought about his mother, about her gentle wisdom. He thought about his father, about his patient games. He thought about the ranch, about the land itself, constant and unchanging while the people who fought over it came and went. "I think I understand now," he said softly. "It was never about the money. It was about who we become when everything's at stake." The bank book sat on the desk behind him, silent as always. But in 3 days, its silence would end. In 3 days, everyone would hear what it had been waiting 50 years to say. The morning of the board meeting, Caleb woke to find an envelope slipped under his hotel room door. No name on it, no postmark. Just thick cream paper with his room number written in careful script. Inside was a single sheet of stationery embossed with Wendell Hartley across the top. "Mr. Vance, I believe we should speak before this afternoon's meeting. I'll be at the Grand Hotel restaurant at 11 o'clock. Come alone. UH." Caleb read it twice, then checked his watch. 9:30. He had time to visit Eleanor first. He found her at her office, already preparing for the meeting. She read Hartley's note and frowned. "This is unusual. He knows who you are." Mitchell must have told him. Mitchell was required to tell the board about a new major shareholder. But the tone of this, she tapped the note. "Come alone. He's trying to isolate you, deal with you before you have support. Should I go? That depends. What do you think he wants? To buy me out or threaten me? Maybe both." Eleanor nodded slowly. "Probably, but it might be worth hearing what he has to say. Sometimes you learn more from what people offer than from what they demand." She stood and picked up her briefcase. "I'll come with you. Not to the table, but I'll be nearby. If things go wrong, you'll have a witness." The Grand Hotel was Casper's finest, a 4-story brick building with a dining room that overlooked the main street. Crystal chandeliers, white tablecloths, service that was attentive without being intrusive. Hartley sat at a corner table, partially screened by a potted palm. He was exactly as Caleb had imagined, mid-60s, silver hair perfectly combed, suit that probably cost more than most men made in a month. But his eyes were what struck Caleb. Sharp and cold, like a hawk watching prey. "Mr. Vance, thank you for coming." Hartley didn't stand, just gestured to the chair across from him. "Please sit. Order whatever you'd like. It's on my account." Caleb sat, but waved off the menu the waiter offered. "I'm fine. What did you want to discuss?" "Direct. I appreciate that." Hartley sipped his coffee, taking his time. "I'll be equally direct. I know about the bank book. I know what it represents. And I know you're planning to attend this afternoon's board meeting. That's my right as a shareholder, of course. But rights are interesting things, Mr. Vance. Sometimes exercising them creates more problems than it solves." Hartley set down his cup. "I'm prepared to make you an offer. A generous one. I'll purchase your founding share for $500,000. Cash, transferred to any account you specify within 48 hours. Caleb kept his face neutral, though his mind was racing. Mitchell had estimated the share's value at around $400,000. Hartley was offering more. "That's above market value," Caleb said. "It is, because I'm not just buying your share, I'm buying your absence. No board meetings, no voting on bank policy, no interference in decisions that have already been made." Hartley leaned forward slightly. "You'd be a wealthy man, Mr. Vance. $500,000. That's enough to start fresh anywhere you want. Buy your own ranch. Build your own legacy. Why tie yourself to a bank board and all the complications that come with it? And my brother's loan, that's between the bank and the borrowers. It has nothing to do with you, unless I'm on the board. Then it has everything to do with me." Hartley's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "Your brothers made their choices. They took out a loan with specific terms. If they can't meet those terms, that's on them. You are cut out of the family. Why should you care what happens to them?" "Maybe I don't, but maybe I care about the principle." "The principle," Hartley repeated, his tone suggesting amusement. "Let me tell you about principles, son. Your father and I had principles. We fought over land and water and rights for 20 years. I lost, every single time. You know why? Because he was better prepared. Because he was luckier. That's all it ever is. Luck and timing. Thomas Vance had good luck. I had bad luck, but luck runs out eventually. For everyone. Hartley pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket and slid it across the table. That's a cashier's check for $500,000. It's yours right now if you sign this agreement. He produced a second paper, a simple contract stating that Caleb Vance agreed to sell his founding share to Wendell Hartley for the specified sum and would not attend any board meetings or exercise any voting rights. Caleb looked at the check. More money than he'd ever imagined having. Enough to disappear, to start over, to never think about his brothers or the ranch or any of this again. What happens if I say no? He asked. Then you attend the meeting this afternoon. You claim your seat, and we become adversaries. Hartley's voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. I have resources, Mr. Vance. Legal resources. Political resources. I can make your life very difficult if I choose to. Is that a threat? It's a fact. I've been building power in this county for 30 years. You've been here 3 weeks. If we go to war, who do you think wins? Caleb folded the contract and slid it back across the table, leaving the check. I'll see you at the meeting. Hartley's face hardened. You're making a mistake. Maybe, but it's my mistake to make. Your father built his empire on knowing when to fight and when to walk away. You should learn from him. I am learning from him, Caleb said, standing. That's exactly what I'm doing. He walked out of the restaurant, past Eleanor, who fell in step beside him. They didn't speak until they were outside, out of earshot. He tried to buy you out, she asked. 500,000. And threats if I refused. How do you feel? Certain. For the first time since this all started, I know what I need to do. Back at his hotel, Caleb had 2 hours before the meeting. He sat at the desk and pulled out a piece of paper. This time, he didn't try to write a letter to his brothers. Instead, he wrote a letter to his father. Dad, I think I finally understand what you were trying to teach me. It wasn't about money or revenge or even justice. It was about choosing who I wanted to be when the world tried to make me small. Marcus, Raymond, and William, they chose to see me as less than them. Hartley chose to see me as a problem to be eliminated. But you saw something different. You saw someone who might choose differently. I hope I'm right about that. I hope this is what you wanted. Love, Caleb. He folded the letter and tucked it into his Bible, next to the photograph of his mother. Then he dressed in his best clothes, still ranch wear, but clean and pressed. He looked at himself in the mirror, a cowboy about to walk into a boardroom, a youngest son about to claim a seat at a table he'd never been invited to. At 1:30, Eleanor met him outside the bank. She carried a leather portfolio and wore a suit that made her look every inch the experienced attorney. Ready? She asked. No, but let's go anyway. They walked into the bank together. Mitchell was waiting in the lobby, looking nervous. Mr. Vance, Miss Garrett, the board is gathering. This way, please. He led them up the stairs to the second floor to the same conference room where Caleb had reviewed the loan documents. But now the table was occupied. 7 men sat around it, with 3 empty chairs remaining. Wendell Hartley sat at the head of the table. The other board members were ranged along the sides, older men, wealthy men, men who'd built their own empires and now managed this one. They all turned to look as Caleb entered. Gentlemen, Hartley said, his voice carrying no hint of their earlier confrontation. I'd like to introduce Caleb Vance, who's recently come into possession of a founding share previously held by his late father. Mr. Vance will be joining us as a voting member of this board. The men murmured among themselves. One of them, a heavy-set man with a white beard, leaned forward. A founding share? I thought we'd bought back all of those. Apparently not, Hartley said smoothly. Mr. Vance, please take a seat. Caleb sat at the table, Eleanor beside him. Mitchell took the remaining chair, opening a ledger book. Now then, Hartley continued, let's begin. First order of business. Excuse me, Caleb said. His voice was quiet, but clear. Before we begin, I'd like to examine the bank's charter, the complete charter, including all amendments and provisions. Hartley's eyes narrowed. That's not typically part of our meetings. It's my right as a founding shareholder to review governing documents. According to the charter Eleanor found, any shareholder can request such a review at any board meeting. Mitchell cleared his throat. That's correct, sir. It's in Section 7. Very well, Hartley said, but his voice had lost its smoothness. Mitchell, please provide the charter. Mitchell left and returned 5 minutes later with a thick binder. He placed it in front of Caleb. Eleanor leaned over. Together they began to read. 10 minutes passed in silence. The board members shifted uncomfortably. Hartley's jaw was clenched. Then Eleanor's finger stopped on a page. She read it once, twice, then looked at Caleb with wide eyes. "This changes everything," she whispered. "What?" Hartley demanded. "What are you looking at?" Eleanor turned the binder so everyone could see. Section 12, subsection D, added in 1930 as an amendment. It states that any founding shareholder who has been wrongfully excluded from family inheritance has the right to invoke a special audit of any loan made to family members. "So?" Hartley said. But his confidence had cracked. So Caleb was wrongfully excluded, given a bank book his brothers believed was worthless. That makes him eligible. Eleanor flipped to another page. And under the audit provision, if irregularities are found in lending practices, the founding shareholder can demand immediate loan restructuring or forgiveness. The room erupted. Board members talking over each other. Hartley's face had gone red, but Caleb just sat there, staring at the words his father had probably helped write 8 decades ago, looking across time to protect a son who hadn't even been born yet. The boardroom erupted into chaos. 3 members spoke at once, their voices overlapping. Another was frantically flipping through his own copy of the charter. Mitchell had gone pale, his hands gripping the edge of the table. Only Hartley remained still, his eyes locked on Caleb with an intensity that bordered on hatred. "This is preposterous," Hartley finally said, his voice cutting through the noise. "That provision hasn't been invoked in 50 years. It was meant for a different era, different circumstances. It's still legally binding," Eleanor countered, "unless you can show me where it was repealed or amended. The intent was to protect shareholders from fraud, not to give them carte blanche to interfere with legitimate lending. And yet the language is clear. A wrongfully excluded family member, and I think we can all agree that receiving a bank book thought to be worth $20 while your brothers inherit a 12,000-acre ranch qualifies as wrongful exclusion, can demand an audit of family loans. The provision doesn't require proof of fraud, just irregularities." "What irregularities?" The question came from the white-bearded man. "I'm Samuel Briggs. I've been on this board for 12 years. I reviewed the Vance Ranch loan personally. Everything was in order." Eleanor pulled out the files Caleb had reviewed. "The interest rate is nearly double the standard agricultural loan rate. The repayment schedule is aggressive, even punitive. And the collateral terms." She pointed to a clause. "The bank can call the entire loan due if any single payment is more than 15 days late. That's not standard practice. That's a trap." Briggs took the file and read it carefully. His expression shifted from confident to concerned. "These terms are harsh. They're within the bank's rights," Hartley said. "But why?" Another board member, younger than the rest, spoke up. "Why offer terms this aggressive on a property that size? The risk-reward doesn't make sense unless—" He stopped, looking at Hartley. "Unless the goal was foreclosure from the start. That's absurd." "Is it?" Caleb spoke for the first time since Eleanor had found the provision. "You and my father fought for 20 years. He won every time. This loan was made 3 months before he died. Were you trying to help his sons, or were you waiting for him to be gone so you could finally beat him?" The silence that followed was absolute. Every man at the table knew the answer. They'd all known, on some level, what this loan really was. Hartley stood slowly. "This meeting is adjourned. We'll reconvene when cooler heads prevail." "No," Caleb said. The word came out stronger than he'd intended. "We're not done. I'm formally invoking the audit provision under Section 12, subsection D. I want a full review of my brother's loan, the terms, the approval process, the collateral assessment, all of it. That will take weeks," Hartley said. "Then we wait weeks. But until the audit is complete, no action can be taken on that loan. No acceleration of payments. No foreclosure proceedings. Nothing. You're protecting them," Hartley said. "After they threw you out with nothing. I'm protecting the principle that banks should serve their communities, not settle old scores." Briggs cleared his throat. "I move that we accept Mr. Vance's audit request and suspend all activity on the subject loan pending the results." "Second," the younger board member said immediately. "All in favor?" Mitchell asked. 4 hands went up. Caleb raised his. 5 votes. Hartley didn't raise his hand. Neither did the two members flanking him. "Motion carries," Mitchell said, his voice shaking slightly. "The audit is authorized." Hartley gathered his papers with precise, controlled movements. "This isn't over, Mr. Vance." "No," Caleb agreed, "but it's not going the way you planned either." After Hartley and his allies left, the remaining board members sat in stunned silence. Finally, Briggs spoke. "That took courage, son. Hartley doesn't forget slights. Neither did my father, apparently. He just planned better." Briggs smiled. "Thomas Vance was playing chess while the rest of us were playing checkers. Looks like he taught you a few moves." The meeting concluded shortly after. Eleanor and Caleb walked out together, not speaking until they reached the street. "You did it," she said finally. "Did I? All I did was ask for an audit. You challenged Wendell Hartley in front of his own board and won. That's not nothing." Caleb looked back at the bank building. "Now comes the hard part." "What's that?" "Facing my brothers. He sent another telegram that afternoon, this one more insistent. 'Must speak with you immediately. Regarding ranch loan.' Caleb." The response came within 2 hours. "Arriving Casper tomorrow, noon M." That evening, Caleb sat in his hotel room with all the documents spread around him. The loan agreement, the audit request, the charter provision, the bank book. His father's careful handwriting stared up at him from 50 years ago. "What was the right answer, Dad?" he asked the silence. "Was there even a right answer, or were you just testing us to see what we'd choose?" A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. He opened it to find Eleanor standing there with a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses. "Thought you might need company," she said. They sat by the window, watching the town settle into evening. Eleanor poured 2 fingers of whiskey into each glass. "Can I ask you something?" Caleb said. "Of course. Why did you take my case?" "I walked into your office with nothing. No money, no prospects. Just a bank book nobody thought was worth anything." Eleanor was quiet for a moment. 20 years ago, I had a case. A widow whose husband died in a mining accident. The company tried to deny her compensation, said he'd violated safety protocols. But I found evidence they'd known about the hazard for months and did nothing. We won. She got a settlement that kept her and her children housed and fed." She sipped her whiskey. "The mine company was owned by Wendell Hartley. He came after you. He tried. Spread rumors. Pressured other clients to drop me. Made things difficult for a few years. But I survived. And I learned that some people use power to build and others use it to destroy. When you walked in with your story, I recognized which kind you were. How could you tell? Because you weren't angry. You were hurt. There's a difference. Angry people want revenge. Hurt people want understanding." She met his eyes. "Your father understood that. He gave you power, but he also gave you a choice about how to use it." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky darkened. Finally, Eleanor stood to leave. "Tomorrow's going to be hard," she said. "When your brothers get here, I know. Do you know what you're going to say to them?" Caleb looked at the bank book on the desk. "I think so. Or at least, I know what I won't say." After she left, Caleb lay in bed, unable to sleep. He kept thinking about his father's careful planning, the decades-long setup that had led to this moment. It must have taken incredible patience, incredible faith that when the time came, Caleb would make the right choice. But what was the right choice? He could use his power to destroy his brothers, let Hartley's trap close on them. That would be justice for how they'd treated him. He could use his power to save them, restructure their loan into something manageable. That would be mercy, proof that he was the bigger man. Or he could do something else entirely. Something his father might not have anticipated, but would probably approve of. The next morning, Caleb woke early and walked through Casper as the sun rose. He found himself at the edge of town, looking out toward the prairie. Somewhere beyond the horizon was the ranch, his home, their home, land that had been in the Vance family for 3 generations. What was a family, really? Blood? Shared history? Or something deeper, shared values, mutual respect, the willingness to build something together rather than tear it apart. His brothers had decided Caleb wasn't family. They'd made that clear at the will reading, but now the tables had turned, and Caleb held the power to define what family meant. By 11:30, he was back at the Grand Hotel. He'd reserved a private dining room, paid for it with some of the cash Mitchell had advanced him against his shares' dividends. Eleanor arrived first, then Mitchell, who'd brought copies of all relevant documents. At noon precisely, The door opened. Marcus walked in first, followed by Raymond and William. They stopped short when they saw Caleb sitting at the head of the table, Eleanor on one side, Mitchell on the other. "What is this?" Marcus demanded. "Your telegram said it was urgent." "It is," Caleb said calmly. "Sit down. We need to talk." Marcus's face reddened. "I don't take orders from—" "Sit down." Caleb's voice didn't rise, but something in it made Marcus hesitate. Then, slowly, he sat. Raymond and William followed. Caleb placed the bank book in the center of the table. "You thought this was worth $20. You were wrong." He explained everything. The founding share, the 50 years of accumulated value, the voting power, the charter provision, the audit he'd demanded. He watched their faces change as understanding dawned. Shock, then disbelief, then something close to panic. When he finished, Marcus leaned back in his chair. "So you own the bank, you own our loan, and you're going to foreclose on us, just like that?" "No," Caleb said. "I'm going to give you a choice." Raymond leaned forward. "What kind of choice?" "The same kind Dad gave me. A chance to decide who you want to be." "I don't understand," William said quietly. "You will," Caleb said. "But first, I need to tell you about Wendell Hartley and why he gave you a loan designed to fail." He laid out everything he'd learned. The decades of disputes with their father, the losses that had accumulated, the revenge that had been simmering for 20 years, waiting for Thomas Vance to die so it could be served cold. "Hartley didn't loan you money to help you expand," Caleb said. "He loaned you money to destroy you, to finally beat Dad by destroying what he built. You were just collateral damage in an old man's grudge." Marcus's hands had clenched into fists. "That bastard." "Yes, but you made it easy for him. You took the loan without reading the terms carefully. You expanded too fast. You let ambition override wisdom." Caleb paused, just like Dad thought you would. "What's that supposed to mean?" Raymond asked. "It means he knew. He knew your weaknesses, just like he knew mine. He set this up so we'd all have to face ourselves. You had to face what it means to have power without wisdom, and I had to face what it means to have power after being powerless. So what happens now?" Marcus asked, and for the first time, his voice carried no arrogance, just fear. Caleb reached into his jacket and pulled out a document Eleanor had prepared. "Now you decide if we're brothers or strangers." Caleb slid the document across the table. Marcus picked it up, and Raymond and William leaned in to read over his shoulder. The silence stretched as they worked through the legal language. Finally, Marcus looked up. "This is a partnership agreement." "Yes, you want to buy into the ranch. Equal shares, all 4 of us." "That's right. I'll use my influence at the bank to restructure your loan. Lower interest rate, longer repayment period, reasonable terms. In exchange, you make me an equal partner. The ranch becomes ours, not yours." "After what we did to you?" William asked. "Just like that. We're supposed to be partners." "No, not just like that," Caleb said. "First, you have to tell me why. Why did you cut me out? Why was I worth so little to you?" The brothers exchanged glances. Marcus spoke first. "Because you were different. You came along when we were already grown, when Mom and Dad were old. It felt like—" He paused, struggling with words. "It felt like you were a replacement. Like they needed another son because we weren't enough. I was a baby, Marcus. I didn't choose when to be born. I know that now, but I was 19 when you came along, old enough to feel threatened. And Dad, he changed with you. He was softer, more patient. Things he'd never given us, he gave to you easily." Raymond nodded. "He taught you to read before you started school. He took you fishing on Sundays. He talked to you like a person, not a worker. We'd spent our whole lives trying to earn his approval, and you just had it, so you resented me." "Yes," Raymond said simply. "We did, and when Dad died, when we had the chance to divide things up, we took what we thought we'd earned and gave you what we thought you deserved. $20. The same amount Dad had started with in 1925. We thought it was poetic. It was cruel," Caleb said quietly. "It was both," Marcus admitted. "We convinced ourselves you'd be fine, that you were young enough to start over, that you didn't need the ranch the way we did, but really, we just wanted you gone." The honesty was startling. Caleb had expected defensiveness, justifications. Instead, his brothers were simply admitting what they'd done. "And why? What changed?" Caleb asked. "Why are you being honest now?" "Because we're cornered," Marcus said. Because you have all the power, and lying won't help us. But also, he looked at his brothers, then back at Caleb. Because in the last 3 weeks, we've realized what we threw away. Not the money. We threw away our brother. William spoke for the first time, his voice barely above a whisper. I wake up every morning ashamed of what we did. I keep thinking about how I could have said something, could have stopped it, but I didn't. I just went along with Marcus and Raymond because that's what I always do. This partnership, Raymond said, pointing at the document. It's more than we deserve. Maybe, Caleb agreed. But Dad gave all of us more than we deserved. The ranch, the land, the opportunity. He also gave us a chance to be better than our worst instincts. He paused. I'm not doing this because I forgive you. I'm not even sure I can forgive you yet. I'm doing this because I'm choosing what kind of man I want to be. What kind is that? Marcus asked. The kind who builds instead of destroys? The kind who gives second chances because he knows everyone needs them eventually? The kind of man Dad was trying to raise when he left me that bank book. Marcus picked up the partnership agreement again, reading it more carefully this time. These terms are fair, more than fair. You're essentially saving us. I'm saving the ranch, the land Dad built. The legacy that shouldn't be destroyed because of old grudges and new mistakes. Caleb leaned forward. But understand this. If we do this, we do it right. Equal partners means equal say, equal work, equal respect. I won't be the youngest brother you tolerate. I'll be your partner, or I'll be your enemy. Choose. The brothers looked at each other. Some unspoken communication passed between them. Then Marcus stood and extended his hand across the table. Partners, he said. Caleb stood and took his hand. Then Raymond's, then William's. 4 brothers, shaking hands over a document that would bind them together in a way blood alone never had. There's one more thing, Caleb said. He pulled out another document. This is a complaint I've prepared for the Banking Commission. It details how Hartley structured your loan as a revenge scheme. With the audit results and this complaint, we can not only restructure your loan, we can probably get him removed from the board. You do that? Raymond asked. Go after Hartley? He tried to destroy our family to settle a score with Dad. Yes, I'll do that, but only if you're with me. This isn't my fight alone anymore. Marcus smiled, and for the first time since they'd entered the room, it was genuine. Then let's take him down. Eleanor, who'd been silent throughout the exchange, spoke up. Gentlemen, if we're going to file this complaint, we need to do it before the audit results are finalized. That means we have 48 hours to gather additional evidence and testimony. What do you need from us? Marcus asked. Everything. Every communication with Hartley. Every document related to the loan. Every conversation you remember. We're going to build a case so airtight that not even Hartley's lawyers can save him. The brothers nodded. Mitchell, who'd been taking notes throughout, looked up with something like satisfaction in his eyes. For what it's worth, he said quietly, I'm glad this is how it turned out. The emergency board meeting was called for Friday afternoon. Hartley tried to delay it, but with 5 votes against his 2, the meeting proceeded. This time, the room was crowded. Eleanor had subpoenaed records. Mitchell had compiled the audit findings, and the Vance brothers sat together in the back row, a unified front. Hartley arrived last, his lawyer beside him. He took his seat with the carefully controlled movements of a man walking into a trap. This meeting is out of order, his lawyer began. My client has not been given adequate time to prepare a defense. Defense? Briggs said. This is a board meeting, not a trial. Nevertheless, accusations have been made. Facts have been presented, Eleanor interrupted, which your client will have every opportunity to address. But let's start with those facts, shall we? She stood and distributed copies of the audit report. Caleb watched Hartley's face as he read it. The color drained slowly, like water seeping from a cracked vessel. The audit reveals several concerning patterns, Eleanor began. First, the interest rate on the Vance Ranch loan was set at 8.5%, while comparable agricultural loans during the same period averaged 4.2%. Second, the repayment schedule required quarterly payments of $12,000, which exceeded standard debt-to-income ratios for agricultural operations by a factor of 3. Third, and most damning, internal bank memos show that Mr. Hartley personally overrode lending officer recommendations on the risk assessment. She held up a document. This is from your chief lending officer, dated January 1974. He wrote, and I quote, "The proposed terms for Vance Ranch are unusually aggressive and carry significant default risk. I recommend restructuring to protect the bank's interests," Mr. Hartley responded. "Proceed as proposed. I'll accept responsibility for any losses." "That's taken out of context," Hartley said. "What context?" Briggs asked. "You knowingly approved a loan designed to fail?" "I approved a loan to borrowers who represented they could handle the terms. If they overestimated their capabilities, that's on them. Except you had evidence they couldn't handle the terms." Eleanor continued. "The lending officer's analysis showed that even in optimal conditions, the ranch would have difficulty maintaining the payment schedule. You knew that. You approved it anyway." Marcus stood up from the back row. "Because you wanted us to fail. You wanted revenge against our father, so you set up his sons to lose everything he built." "That's defamatory," Hartley's lawyer said. "It's true," Mitchell said quietly. All eyes turned to him. He looked older suddenly. Tired. "I've worked at this bank for 30 years. I've watched this unfold." Mr. Hartley has made no secret of his feelings about Thomas Vance. After the water rights case, after every dispute, he talked about getting even. When the Vance brothers came for a loan, he saw his chance. "You're fired," Hartley said. "You can't fire me," Mitchell replied. "I don't work for you. I work for the bank, and right now the bank needs to hear the truth." Briggs set down his copy of the audit. "Wendell, I've known you for 20 years. We've done business together, served on this board. Together, but I can't defend this. If this loan was structured as revenge rather than sound banking practice, that's not just unethical. It's potentially illegal. I move that we request Mr. Hartley's resignation from this board," the younger member said. "Second," said another. "This is absurd," Hartley said, standing. "I've built this bank into what it is today. I've brought in more revenue than any other board member. You can't just—" "All in favor of requesting Mr. Hartley's resignation?" Briggs asked. 6 hands went up. Only Hartley's 2 allies abstained. "The motion carries. Mr. Hartley, we're requesting your immediate resignation from this board. You have 48 hours to comply, or we'll begin removal proceedings." Hartley looked around the room, his eyes finally landing on Caleb. For a moment, something passed between them. Not respect exactly, but recognition. 2 men who'd played a long game and only one had won. "This isn't over," Hartley said. "Yes," Caleb replied calmly. "It is." Hartley and his lawyer left. The remaining board members sat in silence for a moment. Then Briggs spoke. "I move that we immediately restructure the Vance Ranch loan to terms consistent with standard agricultural lending practices. Interest rate of 4%, extended repayment period of 15 years, and removal of all punitive clauses." "Second," said another member. The vote was unanimous. "One more thing," Caleb said. "I'd like to nominate Marcus Vance to fill the vacant board seat. He's been running a major ranch operation for years. He understands agricultural lending from the borrower's perspective. And this bank needs board members who care about serving the community, not settling old scores." Marcus's eyes widened. Raymond and William looked equally stunned. "That's highly irregular," one board member said. "So is everything else that's happened this week," Briggs said with a slight smile. "But I like it. A Vance on the board. It would make Thomas proud. All in favor?" This time all 7 remaining hands went up. After the meeting ended, the 4 brothers stood outside the bank in the late afternoon sun. For a long moment, none of them spoke. Finally, Marcus put his hand on Caleb's shoulder. "Thank you doesn't cover it." "Then don't say it," Caleb replied. "Just be the partner I'm trusting you to be." "I will. We all will." They stood there together, 4 brothers, looking out at a town that had just witnessed something it would talk about for years. A youngest son who'd been thrown away had come back and saved the family that rejected him. "Dad would be proud," Raymond said softly. "Yeah," Caleb agreed. "I think he would." 6 months later, Caleb stood on the porch of his cabin, rebuilt now, expanded, with a proper foundation and a view that stretched across the eastern pasture to the hills beyond. The morning sun was just breaking over the ridge, painting everything in gold and amber. The same light that had greeted him every morning of his life. Except now it felt different. Now it felt like home. Chester grazed nearby, older but content. The bay gelding had earned his retirement, spending his days in a paddock with good grass and fresh water. Caleb had bought 2 new horses, younger, stronger, but he still visited Chester every morning with an apple or a carrot. "Coffee's ready," Caleb turned to find Marcus standing in the doorway, 2 mugs in hand. His oldest brother looked different too, thinner, the weight of stress shed along with the crushing loan terms. There were still lines around his eyes, but they crinkled now when he smiled. "Thanks." Caleb took a mug and gestured to the empty chair beside him. Marcus sat, and they drank in comfortable silence, watching the ranch wake up. The restructured loan had given them breathing room. With reasonable terms and 4 partners sharing both the work and the profits, the ranch was not just surviving, it was thriving. They'd hired 2 new hands, invested in better breeding stock, repaired fences and buildings that had been neglected during the crisis. But more than the physical improvements, something else had changed. The 4 brothers worked together now as a team. Marcus made the big decisions, but only after consulting with Raymond's financial analysis, William's operational insights, and Caleb's measured perspective. The ranch that had been divided by inheritance had been reunited by necessity and choice. "Board meeting this afternoon," Marcus said. "You coming?" "Wouldn't miss it." After Hartley's forced resignation, the bank had settled into a new rhythm. Briggs had taken over as chairman. Marcus had proven to be a thoughtful board member, advocating for fair lending practices that helped ranchers rather than exploited them. And Caleb attended every meeting, not to dominate, but to ensure the bank remembered what it was supposed to be. A community institution, not a weapon. "How's the old cabin working out?" Marcus asked, gesturing to the small structure visible across the pasture. "Eleanor likes it, says it's cozy." Marcus smiled. "Never thought I'd see you settle down." "Neither did I." Eleanor had been staying at the ranch more and more often. They hadn't made any formal announcements, but everyone knew. She still kept her law practice in Casper, still fought for clients who needed someone in their corner, but she'd found something at the ranch she hadn't expected, a kind of peace that came from being somewhere she belonged. Raymond appeared from the main house, carrying a folder. He'd taken over as the ranch's chief financial officer, a role that suited his analytical mind. Behind him came William with his children, 2 boys who loved the ranch as much as their father did. The family was growing, spreading roots. "Got the quarterly numbers," Raymond said, handing the folder to Marcus. "We're up 12% from last year. That's with the new equipment." "Purchase?" Marcus asked. "Already factored in. We're in good shape." They gathered around the porch, talking about the day's work, the weather forecast, a fence line that needed attention. Normal ranch business. Normal family business. The kind of conversations that happened every morning across thousands of ranches, but which had seemed impossible 6 months ago. After the others dispersed to their tasks, Caleb remained on the porch. He pulled out the bank book. He still carried it, though it had long since been transferred into proper stock certificates and legal documents. The yellowed pages were fragile now, the ink faded almost to invisibility, but he could still see his father's handwriting, still feel the weight of what Thomas Vance had done. The old man had set in motion a chain of events that wouldn't resolve for 50 years. He'd planted a seed, knowing he'd never see it grow. A man plants seeds he might never see grow. That's what building a future means. Whitmore's words, quoting his father, Caleb understood now. The ranch wasn't just land and cattle. It was time, generations overlapping, each one building on what came before. His grandfather had started with 100 acres. His father had grown it to 12,000. Now Caleb and his brothers would pass it on to their children, stronger and more united than ever. "You did it, Dad," Caleb said quietly to the morning air. "You taught us all what we needed to learn." Marcus had learned that power without wisdom leads to ruin. Raymond had learned that ambition needs to be tempered with caution. William had learned that following others isn't the same as finding your own path. And Caleb, he'd learned that sometimes the greatest strength isn't in being the biggest or the loudest or the first. Sometimes it's in being the one who chooses mercy when vengeance is available, who chooses building when destruction is easier, who chooses family even when family has failed you. Eleanor emerged from the cabin, dressed for town. She kissed his cheek and took the mug from his hand. "You're thinking about him again. Always do this time of morning. He'd be proud of you, of all of you. I hope so." They stood together, watching the sun climb higher. In the distance, cattle moved slowly across the pasture. Closer, Marcus and Raymond were examining something in the equipment barn. William's boys were racing each other to the creek, their laughter carrying on the morning breeze. This was the empire Thomas Vance had built, not the land or the money, though those mattered, but this. Sons working together, family restored, a legacy that would outlast them all. Caleb touched the bank book one last time, then tucked it away. He didn't need it anymore. He knew what it represented. Not $20, not even $400,000 or a controlling share in a bank. It represented a choice, the choice to be better than your circumstances, to rise above betrayal without becoming bitter, to have power and use it wisely. That was his father's real inheritance. And Caleb had claimed it, not at the will reading or the bank or the board meeting, but here, in this moment, standing on his own land with his family around him and his future stretching bright before him. There's a special heartbreak when your own blood turns their back on you, but there's a special joy when they turn back around and choose you again. When family isn't just blood, but effort. When home isn't just a place, but a decision you make every single day. For Caleb Vance, that decision had been made, and in making it, he'd found not just an inheritance, but himself. The morning sun climbed higher, painting the ranch in shades of gold, and Caleb smiled, knowing that whatever challenges came next, he wouldn't face them alone. He had his brothers, his land, his future. He had everything that mattered. He was home.